Chase at the 40. Look at that move. Look at Chase go. Oh, my goodness. What a gear.
He comes down to this in his car end zone. Intercepted.
McPherson. And Cincinnati is heading to the Super Bowl.
Toss here. Mixon's going to throw. Open man. Caught. Higgins. Touchdown.
Drives. Touchdown. Joe Burrow has his first rushing touchdown of the season.
Hooday, Bengal fans. He is Maan. I am Jake. This is the Bengals Pulse, the heartbeat of our Cincinnati Bengals. Maan, special edition Bengals Pulse today. We are coming to you live. It is Saturday morning after the really, I'm going to say it, Maan, really big news. I mean, I don't think it's just big news in Bengaldom. I think it's big news in the NFL because I think the NFL has been waiting around to see what domino is going to fall first here in this Bengals contract situation. You saw Adam Schefter. I mean, as soon as the news went out, and obviously Peter Schaefer, who is Joe Mixon's agent, dropped the news. As soon as Peter Schaefer dropped the news, it was all over Twitter. I mean, this is a big deal. Number one, it's a big deal, Mom, because our Bengals have never had a player restructure their contract. And again, we're going to get into that and what that means about the organization again. And we've talked about the great direction that we're going in, but we're going to talk a little bit about that as well. And we're going to talk about how this domino effect is going to occur now, because to me, Mon, I think we're going to see some big news coming up this week. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, exciting. I was surprised to see it, but I wasn't surprised to see it because, I think we had a good idea that he wasn't going to play at $12.8 million this year. Yeah. The Bengals are very, methodical. They're not going to go out in public and talk about negotiations with agents and other players, but it happened. I saw that tweet from Paul Daner yesterday. You just mentioned it. The Cincinnati has never restructured a contract. There have been offers, but none have ever agreed to. And it's truly amazing the lack of precedent to so many things they've done in recent years. The Bengals have changed. There's so many, naming rights, you name it. There's so many things that the Bengals have just always, held tight, but they've changed. And this Joe Mixon contract restructuring is huge because it's probably going to help with potentially T. Higgins, Logan Wilson. We know Joe Burrow is going to get done. But other players, maybe DJ Reader, it opens up a lot of things for them and makes them more flexible with contract negotiations over the next couple years.
No doubt. And again, Mon, I think too, it says a little bit about when you talk about the Bengals never restructuring a contract or never having one done. Again, offers, as you read earlier, and that was, I think, from Dana, right, on Twitter. Yes. Offers had been made. It's never gone through. Why has it gone through now? Again, we talk about this Joe Burrow effect, Mon, and how it trickles down to this organization. And yes, the Bengals are doing all these new things that they've never done before, but at the same time, players want to be here. And I don't know if that's something that has been the case for a very long time. And you see the effect of this. And you and I have talked about this. You and I have both been Joe Mixon supporters. We both believe that this team is much better with Joe Mixon on it. We both said he's not going to be playing for $12 million this year. I think you and I both knew that. And I'm not saying that we're geniuses or anything. It was really common sense. For the ones who said that Joe Mixon was not going to be in a Bengal uniform, again, that was never going to happen. So your thought process on that makes absolutely no sense to Mon and I. But obviously, I think we all thought maybe the Joe Burrow contract situation was going to be the first domino. But the first domino, Mon, is the Joe Mixon restructuring. And I think now we might see this stuff start to start to fall. The Joe Burrow, the T. Higgins, the Logan Wilson, all before hopefully training camp here in a couple weeks. Going to be very interesting couple of weeks to see how all of this kind of works itself out.
Yeah, it is. Jake, we can all be a little cynical at times when it comes to sports. We look at players, they're greedy, players this, players, all they care about is money. Of course, players want to get paid. It's a brutal profession. NFL running backs the last 4 or 5 years. It's bigger than money. Joe Mixon wants to win a championship, and he knows that's going to happen at Cincinnati. The Bengals have always treated him well. When he was drafted, they came in and they really opened up their arms to him. Joe Burrow is here. He knows that Super Bowl window is open. He wants to be a part of a championship, and he knows if he doesn't accept this restructuring, he might go to a team that's not positioned like the Cincinnati Bengals to win a championship. Players want to win. They also want to get paid, obviously, but it's bigger than that. It's about their legacies, and their legacies are defined by championships. And Joe Mixon wants to win that. And I think he's going to get one in Cincinnati, and he knows that. And that's why he agreed to it.
Well, let me ask you, Maan. Let me ask you, do you think if he doesn't agree to it, do you think the Bengals part ways?
Jake, if his agent and Joe, if they're hardliners and they said, no, we're not going to take a restructuring, I think the Bengals would have moved on. $12.8 million is a lot of money. Joe Mixon is so important to this team, and he's important to the locker room. I think the Bengals probably would have moved on. And, they drafted Chase Brown. They have a stable of running backs there. I'm glad it didn't come to that. And I think Joe Mixon knew he was going to get approached. Remember a few months ago, he made some comments about, I would love to still play here. It's not always about money. That wasn't exactly what he said. We knew from that statement. I know what you were talking about. Yeah, it's coming. It was coming. Luckily, it didn't come to that. That was just, my opinion. I think the Bengals probably would have moved on, but that's not an option right now. He's going to be here. The Bengals save about $3.5 million. That could go a long way to maybe re-upping somebody this year, next year. That gives them some flexibility. I mean, Jake, there might be a free agent out there that they want to bring in to shore up a position still. There's a lot of guys out there that haven't signed that are good, productive pros. We'll see what happens. I think the next week, 2 weeks is going to be huge because training camp is right around the corner. I think the next edition of the Bengals Pulse, we're going to talk about a re-signing or a new player that they've added to the roster. And it's going to be interesting to see who that is.
Yeah, it's going to be exciting. And let's talk about, Maan, let's talk about this restructuring a little bit. Now, again, Joe Mixon, we keep talking about that $12.8 million number out there for Joe Mixon this year. I think that was actually going to be the cap hit, right? I mean, the actual money, I think the actual money divvied out was probably going to be a little over $10 million, which again is still a lot for a running back. But in between that $10, $11 million range is what Joe Mixon was guaranteed. And I think the 12.8 was actually the cap hit. And now the word is that he has restructured a little under 6 or right at 6 mil, I think somewhere in that range. And it does have escalators. I think that can get up to around 8 million. Is that correct?
That's what I read on Pro Football Talk. It's going to be in the high fives, 5.8 million. And with incentives that can reach up to 8 million. What those incentives are, I do not know. But it's going to equate to about a $3 million, a little bit more than $3 million cap savings per that website. I'm sure more data will come out over the next couple days. We're recording this on a Saturday. So we'll get more information there. But Pro Football Talk's pretty reputable, and those numbers seem good to me.
Yeah, it's again, like I said, it's going to be this trickle down effect is going to be very interesting to see what the next domino is. And I think, like you said before, $3.5 million, it might not sound like a lot when you see a lot of these big contracts, but that's a big number to save when you have some extensions to start divvying out here. And I think when you look at when you look at this domino and you look at this piece that now has kind of worked itself in place, I think we need to understand that this is not just about paying Joe Mixon in a reasonable range. This is about putting money aside for what's about to come in Cincinnati. I think that is something we don't need to overlook, because I do think we get kind of caught up in the, all this Joe Mixon talk that has gone on over the last months has been a lot about he's not worth this amount of money. He's not worth this kind of money. And we're going to go over his numbers in just a minute. But I don't think, honestly, Ma, I don't think this is so much he's not worth this kind of money. I think the Bengals have restructured this thing, and they've probably gone to Joe and said, listen, do you want T? Do you want Logan? Do you want these guys? I'm talking about Joe Mixon, not just Joe Burrow, but Joe Mixon. I mean, Joe Mixon has what, two years left on his deal? I think we were talking about off air, 2 years left on his deal. Yes. So, there's definitely a Joe Mixon window here, and I would not be surprised if the Bengals went to Joe Mixon and said, "Hey, listen, man, we want you on this team. We have this incredible roster right now, but we got to re-sign a couple guys. And if you're going to be here for the next 2 years, how important is it that to you that we're able to keep some of these guys?" I just think I would love to know what those talks sounded like behind closed doors with Joe Mixon, because Joe Mixon, we've said it on the show, he's an incredible teammate, he's a great leader. The off the field stuff, it is what it is, but when we're talking about when he's in that building, the kind of player he is, you said it many a times on this show, Maan. You love watching him, even when he's not in the game, when he's not playing, he's rooting for the defensive guys. He's rooting for the offensive guys. He's running up and down the sideline. I mean, the iconic A.J. Green touchdown to beat the Falcons. I mean, that whole series of events with Joe running off the sidelines, being the first one there to congratulate him. I just think this guy, like you said, it's more about he wants to be a part of this organization. He knows that he knows how good we're going to be, but he wants to be a part of this organization. I think that's very important to Joe Mixon.
Yeah, our guest Trag said that on the show a few weeks ago. He said that everybody in the locker room, they love Joe Mixon. Yeah. His energy is infectious. Jake, after the draft, they had that rookie minicamp in May. They had a clip where Yoshivas caught a pass over the middle, and Joe Mixon's running down the field, patting him on the back. This is rookie minicamp. All right. Yeah. And Joe Mixon is there, and he's just very excited. And the team loves him. The players love him. He's important. If Joe Mixon was on the team this year and the Bengals decided to pay him $12 million, I'd be happy with it. I wouldn't be upset about that.
Yeah,
I'm glad he's on the team. But, the Bengals approached his agent. He got it. They understand. The Bengals, you need some salary cap room here to make some other moves. And I'm glad they both agreed. I'm glad both sides agreed. And Joe Mixon is important to the Bengals. The Cincinnati Bengals are a better team with him on it. And, we talk about the struggles of that running game last year. Jake, the first 5 games of last year, they were on a historically bad, a horrible pace when it comes to running the football. They were averaging 2.4 yards per carry. They were really struggling. Then that switch turned. The Bengals coaches altered their running scheme a little bit. The offensive line got better. And then they took off, and they started really playing a lot better after week 5. But it was so bad week 1 to 5, that the rushing stats were a little skewed last year. I don't expect that to happen this year. I think he's going to have a very good year. I think the Bengal rush attack is going to improve dramatically, and it's going to help the Bengals. And hey, I'm glad he's here. I think he's going to get his championship. We're going to get our championship. The Bengals are going to have a special season.
Well, let's talk about real quick. Let's talk about Joe Mixon's numbers, and let's talk about where, again, because we're throwing out there all this money talk about Joe Mixon. Let me just throw some numbers at you real quick. All right. So he's played 6 seasons. This is going to be his 7th season in the NFL, which which I will say is quite a bit for an NFL running back to be on the same team his entire career. I mean, again, the lifespan of running backs in the NFL is very short. We all know this. But Joe Mixon going on his 7th year as a Bengal, Mon. And in those 7 years, in those 6 years, Joe Mixon just over 7,000 total yards. So just over 7,000 total yards. Touchdown-wise, we're talking about receiving and rushing the ball. 50 touchdowns. So 50 touchdowns in 6 years. And again, I think we have to keep in mind, even like this past year, he misses 3 games, still rushes for 800 yards, actually had his best receiving season this year with over 400 yards receiving. So he still had over 1,200 total yards this year. But I want to look back a year before that, when arguably the Bengals had the worst offensive line in the NFL. They truly did. I mean, let's call it what it is. But that Super Bowl year, Mon, that offensive line was atrocious. I think if you would have gone and tried out, you probably would have at least come off the bench. You might have been the 6th man. I'm not saying you're starting on that Bengal O-line, but you're probably the 6th man, Mon. You have those advanced genetics that we all hear so much about. Mon, Joe Mixon had his best year in 21, which again, I think those kind of things get overlooked with him. He had over 1,500 total yards in 21. He had his most yards rushing. He had his most attempts. He had his most touchdowns running the football, and he had his most touchdowns receiving the football. 16 total touchdowns in 21 for Joe Mixon, over 1,200 yards against an offensive line, Mon, that was, I mean, below average at best. I really don't think we could even go above below average. And this guy, again, I just think his talent gets so overlooked, Mon. We talk about how good Joe Burrow is and how good Joe Burrow did behind that awful offensive line in 21. What about what Joe Mixon did in 21? Let's not forget how good he was in 21.
Jake, I used 2021 as an example in a little Joe Mixon debate a few months ago, when everybody was on the cut Joe's ridiculous, Joe this, there's 25 other better running backs in the NFL than Joe Mixon. And I was getting laughed at because I was using, remember the NFL top 100 players? They had him at top 30, top 40 player in the NFL that year. They're saying, "Are you using a popularity contest to show his worth?" It's bigger than a popularity contest. You just gave out all the stats. The guy was unbelievable, and we don't talk enough about his pass receiving and what he does as a receiver. His hands, he has great hands. How many one-handed catches have you seen from Joe Mixon?
Oh, yeah.
And he's a great player. The Cincinnati Bengals, broken record. We say it all the time. We are so much better having him on the team. Mm-hmm. That game last year, I was at that game, and when they played the Panthers, he had 5 touchdowns. And listen, he was nicked up. He missed a handful of games last year. But when he played the Buffalo game, he had over 100 yards rushing in the playoffs. He's an effective player. He's a good player. I think he's a top 10 back in football. I do. And I don't care what anybody says. Some people might say, no, he's still a top 10 back. And the Bengals are lucky to have him. And you know what? Let's see what happens. This year, I think he's going to be extra motivated. He knows, he's on social media. He sees what some of the fans think about him and what's going on. He could end up having one of his best careers as a pro this year in Cincinnati.
Well, again, we're throwing out all these numbers in 21. Let's not forget, in those 4 playoff games, Mon, he had almost 400 total yards. So if you include the playoffs in 21, Joe Mixon at almost 2,000 total yards in 21, including the playoffs. So again, I don't think this guy gets enough credit. You know, in 2020, he was really banged up. I think he only played 6 or 7 games in 2020. So this guy has not even really. I don't know. I hate using the term fresh legs, but if this guy comes back healthy this year, he's got some fresh legs still, and he's got some time left on those treads. I think this could be a very special year for Joe Mixon, not just because of where he is in his career, but I think because our offensive line, I've said it before, I think it's the best offensive line we've had in decades.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, this is with Orlando Brown and, Kappa, Karras. Volson has another year of development. They're all going to be in year two. The interior of the offensive line, those three, this is their second year playing together. They're going to be better just by that. Adding Orlando Brown. Now, right tackle, we don't know. I think it's going to be Jonah Williams. LC, I think, is going to start the season on the physically unable to perform list. But this is by far the best offensive line that the Bengals have had in years. Joe Burrow's going to cook. Joe Mixon's going to cook. Right now, this offense could take it to another level. We sort of touched on this last week. They're going to need to a little bit because we have some young pieces in that defensive backfield that's going to need some protection. This is where that offense is going to step up a little bit and help the defense out a little bit. So, yeah, it's going to be exciting to see. Training camps in 2 weeks. It's going to be exciting to see, Jake, what happens with contract extensions. Like I said a few minutes ago, we know Burrow's going to happen. I'm confident Higgins is going to happen. I've been really a little worried about the Logan Wilson thing. This makes me feel a little better about him. I wouldn't be surprised if Logan Wilson's one of the first ones signed over the next couple of weeks. And
I don't disagree with you. I think the Bengals have prioritized those 3 guys. I think those 3 guys are priority. And as hard as it is to, what everybody thinks, how difficult it's going to be for the Bengals to go out and put all these pieces in place for years to come. It can be done. And we've talked about this on the show. It can be done. It's very workable to get those 3 guys back in the stripes. And this helps tremendously. Again, I don't think people realize how far $3.5 million can go when you are re-signing players. But we will see how this all kind of pans out. I think we're definitely going to do a show here early on in the week. Hopefully, we'll have some more news to report. Come what do you think? Tuesday, Wednesday?
We'll see. I think if any contract extensions happen, I think Mock Turtle Soup, the kickoff luncheon's the 25th or the 26th, one of those two. I wouldn't be surprised if there's another signing. It may not be a contract renegotiation or re-up. It could be another player. I mean, Jake,
yeah.
If I'm not mistaken, I don't think we're at 90. The Bengals can end up bringing in somebody else. I'm not saying a top-tier player, but there's 10, 15 solid NFL starters that haven't been signed yet. Maybe the Bengals bring in somebody, maybe another guard, another defensive tackle.
Yeah.
We'll see. It's going to be very interesting over these next 2 weeks. We'll see how it shakes out.
Absolutely. We are going to come back to you guys next week. We'll do a show sometime early on in the week. We'll drop another show. We'll update you on everything that's coming up and going to have some training camp talk, Maan, leading up to probably, I'm going to say, one of the most exciting training camps that I can remember. It's just going to be very interesting to see with the contract talks and guys' health and how everybody comes back. And I think these Bengals, I think losing the Super Bowl definitely put a chip on their shoulder. But I think after all the talking that the Chiefs have done this offseason, I don't know, man. I think this Bengal team is going to be different than anything that we have ever seen. You know that they've heard it. You know that they've heard the talk. This week, I think or last week, I can't remember. It was either this week or last week. Pat Mahomes came out, was talking trash. Obviously Travis Kelce, he's a clown. It's constant, just garbage coming out of his mouth. And Joe Burrow said, "We'll see you guys. We'll see you guys at the end of the year." This team is locked in. It's going to be exciting.
Did you see the Netflix documentary on the quarterbacks and what
I will
Pat
not
Mahomes
watch
said?
that.
Well,
I will not watch that. I'm not watching Pat Mahomes.
I'm
not watching Pat Mahomes and his clown show of a family, his wife, his brother. I don't want to even spend a second of my life watching that clown show of a family.
Well, the comments that were posted on social media, they had the snippets, and what he said after they beat the Jaguars, they asked him, "Did you see that clip?" It was actually it was very complimentary. It was actually very complimentary of the Bengals.
Something about they want to play the Bengals or something.
No, that's not what he said.
Because the Bills. I don't know.
He said they asked him how he thought the Bengals-Bills game would go. He said, "Well, the Bills have a chance because the Bengals' offensive line is hurt." He goes, "I think the Bengals are a lot better." He says the Bengals are better. He goes, and I think Kansas City. He goes. I think we match up better to the Bills than the Bengals. So he admits it. He knows that the Bengals are a harder team to play. He goes, but I'm a competitor. He goes, they beat us. He goes, and they're talking. He goes, I want to play the Bengals. It is what it is, But I took it. He basically repeated what we've been saying on social media, and it was sort of refreshing to hear him say that. That's the only clip I saw, but it was interesting to hear him say that. He was talking to his dad about it.
Yeah, it's gonna be exciting. I'm just, again, like I said, the excitement built up around this team and this roster and this training camp coming up. I cannot wait to bring all that and more to the Bengals Pulse. And that is another edition of the Bengals Pulse, a special edition of the Bengals Pulse. Once again, guys, if you liked this podcast, make sure you like, share, and subscribe to this podcast. Make sure you check us out on all the awesome podcast platforms, Apple, Stitcher, Spotify. As always, give Maan and I that 5-star review. We very much appreciate that 5-star review. Follow Maan at The Fire Maan. Follow me at Coach Jake Owens 9. Follow the Bengals Pulse at Bengals_Pulse9. The same on Instagram without the at. Bengals_Pulse9. And as always, check out all the awesome podcasts right here on the Wincinnati Podcast Network. He is Maan. I am Jake. This is the Bengals Pulse. Hoo day, Bengal fans. We will see you here in a couple days.
See you guys.